that. Oh, for the question and answer. He was going to make me stand in one spot. It'd kill me. It's just like, tie my hands and I'm speechless, folks. Okay, so, but I do appreciate Warren and the efforts that he's put forward and the efforts of the congregation. Certainly, I know a great deal of work goes into this, and I've been looking forward to the opportunity to be here, be with you. And so I hope that you'll, find out more that you don't know. Maybe I'll find one or two things that you haven't thought about. I certainly hope that if you are not currently, a creationist believing in, the Bible is God's Word, that at least you'll give it a fair hearing. I've had the opportunity at the Oxford Roundtable to actually speak to people that I knew the majority of them were not Bible believers. They were not theistic in any way. Matter of fact, most of them were atheistic. And I tried to be very gentle with them, try not to offend them too much, but they took offense anyway. And tomorrow during one of the sessions at the congregation, I'll be presenting the 2008 Roundtable presentation, which, it's like I said, it's interesting to try to talk to people that hate your guts, and they consider me the most dangerous man in England on that day. I guess I was the biggest terrorist they had ever seen. Because I believe that God's Word is true and that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But that's tomorrow. This morning we want to look at two topics. This first session, which basically is an introduction into the creation of science. And if we could get the lights dimmed a little bit, and I'm not sure how that's going to affect Travis up there with the video recording. And again, we're trying to get this recorded as well as possible. I've already had requests for these DVDs. But as we go through this, that's probably fine right there. Let's try this. And like I said, this is a marvelous setup as far as the auditorium, the projector. I've never had a screen that big for my presentation, so I'm a little awestruck by how large it is as well. But Paul in the book of Romans, chapter 1, in talking about the idea that we can look and see from the creation, we can see evidence that there is a God, that God did create the world, the invisible things, and we'll actually be talking about that during our sermon tomorrow morning. There is a God, and we'll be looking at some of the invisible things from the creation of the world. And they're here for us to look at. And so in our presentation today, we're going to look at a few things. Now, there is no way that I'll complete this presentation. It's 4 hours long, all right? I know most of you want to eat lunch. I do too. And so I've got a timekeeper up here. He's going to be very faithful at giving me a 5-minute warning and then tackling me and taking the mic away from me if I don't stop. But like I said, there is so much of this. The articles that I write in the West Virginia Christian and God Created, which are available on the Beelington Church of Christ website. And we're now getting up the last 76 or something, so they'll all about 110 of them be present on the church's website. So if you want to read some more of that, if you've seen those in the West Virginia Christian, and each one of those could be part of this presentation. Well, if we stopped and looked at the three different animals that we see on the screen up here, and we talked about each one of them in detail. Whether it's the delayed implantation of the marsupials like the kangaroo. You realize that a female kangaroo can, after giving birth to a joey, she is just literally days away from having given birth, she'll get pregnant again. And she will not implant that embryo, that baby joey, that new fertilized egg will not implant in her uterus until such time as the joey that is in her pouch reaches 2 to 3 years of age. She is capable of stopping implantation. She doesn't become pregnant for 2 to 3 years, depending on the age of maturation of the joey. It's an amazing feat. If humans could do that, certainly we might be able to have a whole lot less unwed mothers, because they could, if they did get pregnant, they would simply put the pregnancy on hold for 2 years and maybe more mature and things like that. But it's an amazing, amazing feat that the kangaroos have. And then, of course, if we stopped and looked at the duckbill platypus with its ability, it's basically blind, especially when it swims. when it goes hunting for its food because it closes its eyes. So when it's swimming in the streams looking for worms and small crustaceans, it closes its eyes. So how does it find its food? There are electroreceptors on the bill. It can sense electrical impulses to the tune of, you could put about 1,000 of them in a 9-volt battery. All right, so it can detect electrical charges. Just muscle contractions of an earthworm is enough to trigger the electrical receptors on the duckbill platypus's bill, and of course then it goes and has lunch. And then of course if we look at the cicada and the tremendous ability which is still they're still trying to understand exactly how the cicada are capable of telling, without a calendar down underground, how they're capable of telling exactly how many years 17, how long 17 years is before they are to come out of the ground after being a nymph for 17 years, and in that 17th year, they will come out of the ground, become the adult, and reproduce, and then, of course, the eggs drop back down, larvae go back in the ground, and it waits 17 more years. And it's interestingly enough because there's at least 9 different broods of cicada around the country. In other words, there are 9 different areas where these cicada, and actually there are 9, 13, and 17-year cicada. So we could talk about the biochemistry of what's going on inside that little cicada for hours, literally hours on each one of those. Obviously, we don't have time to do that, and so we're going to move on to, some of the areas that we're going to be talking about, of course, come from the biology, the study of life. And here's a quote by a man that you may have heard of. Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. It's an amazing quote, because when we look at biology, the study of life, it looks like each individual thing that we study appears to have been designed for a particular purpose and a particular reason. Now, that's absolutely true, and as a creationist, as somebody who believes that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, there's no question in my mind that God designed it exactly how He wanted it to be. At the end of the creation, God said, and it was very good. At the end of each day, He said it was good. And at the end of the 6 days, it was very good. And God was pleased with the design of everything that He had done. But when we know that this individual, Richard Dawkins, is the one who said it, Richard Dawkins became, after the death of Carl Sagan, became the mouthpiece for evolution. He is an atheist through and through. I had the opportunity to meet his graduate assistant. He couldn't be at the Oxford Roundtable because he is a professor of biology at Oxford University. His graduate assistant, or one of them, he has several, was able to be at the Oxford Roundtable where when I spoke. And I got to talk to her a little bit. She's a very pleasant lady, and I understand he's a very pleasant gentleman. But, he's an atheist. He doesn't believe that there's anything in design, and yet when he studies biology, he believes there's evidence of design in each of the things that he studies. And yet he gets terribly offended whenever, as a creationist, I say God designed these things to work the way they do. And yet that's what, So in my presentation in 2008 to the Oxford participants, basically used all of their quotes, well, not all of them, but used only quotes of atheistic scientists to point out that our disagreement with evolution and our belief in the creation account isn't because we don't know the scientific facts. There's another reason for it. It's because we don't accept the conclusions that have to be drawn when you accept those worldviews of naturalism and things coming about by accidents. And so Richard Dawkins also agrees that biology gives the appearance of things that are designed. And so as we look at some of the individual things from biology, don't think in the time we have today we're going to get to the physics or the astronomy. That's lessons 2 and 3 and 4. But we'll get to some of the biological things. There's the beginning of biology, of course, you have to have life. Okay, the law of biogenesis, bio meaning life, genesis meaning beginning. The ideas of biogenesis are critical to both the creationist and to the evolutionist because life is here, folks. Believe it or not, we're here. Okay, there's little crawly bugs crawling around. There's our skin is crawling with bacteria. Billions and billions of bacteria inhabit our skin all the time. There are little mites in our eyelashes. Okay, life is here. There's no question about it. The question is how to get here. That's the question of the hour for all biologists. And of course, there are two possible answers. In the beginning, God. And we obviously have trouble. We don't know what God is. We're three-dimensional beings. We don't know if God is a 20-dimensional being of some sort. We simply don't know what God is. We know that he says he is and he exists, and we have evidence to point to that. Or you're going to believe that God did it, or you're going to believe in spontaneous generation. And it's not a chicken or egg thing, because if God did it, what came first? The chicken. God created mature forms and told them to be fruitful and multiply after their kind, and they did, and we still are. Chickens still produce chickens, dogs, puppies, etc., etc., etc. That's the law of genetics. We'll get there in a minute. Biogenesis, of course, is the concept that evolutionists, naturalists must pin their hopes on, because if it were not for something happening that made life just spontaneously poof, there it is. Some real strange events, because number one, the law of biology, the law of biogenesis says life doesn't come from anything other than other life, period. That's part of the cell theory. And it's absolutely true. There's never been an exception to that. No matter how much scientists have tried to to carry on the experiments that will produce life in a test tube, they haven't even got any closer than very basic fundamental proteins. And they come apart just as soon as they take them out of their special environment. It's a crazy process. They've been trying, the most intelligent biologists we have been trying for 150, almost 200 years now, to create one cell, and they haven't even got the first letters right. And so to say that somehow, somewhere, back in the mythical reaches of time, it was possible for the conditions to become just exactly right, and poof, there we are. And now we start from there, and we go from 1 cell to 2 to 4 to 8, 16, 32, and bang, here we are. All right? Well, that's a pretty far stretch, and it requires a lot of faith. If you're a naturalist, you have to agree that spontaneous generation had to happen once, but then after all, it never happens again, though. Never happens again. Well, they've been trying to make it happen, but they can't. And so the law of biogenesis is one of those things. This quote is by Jeff Tompkins, a PhD geneticist from Clemson University. That's the biggest problem for evolution. How life got started. Because you need DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. We'll talk about that in proteins. You need DNA to make RNA, ribonucleic acid. And you need RNA to make proteins, which of course is what all living things are made of, is proteins. So it's worse than what came first, the chicken or the egg. Because it's not just the egg came first or the chicken came first. You've got to have the DNA, which is huge, contains vast amounts of information. You've got to have the RNA, which is the structural feature that allows cells to produce proteins, and proteins are what make up all living things. And so the most simple of bacteria has thousands and thousands of proteins. So that first cell that spontaneously generated, supposedly, would have had to assemble just an astronomical amount of material. And it's not just, well, you put some organic stuff in a jar and shake it up and shoot some electricity in, and bang, there's a cell. It's much more complicated than that. And the chicken and the egg thing is an easy question as compared to where the first life form came from. Well, then as we look at other parts of biology, there's something that most of us don't know too much about, called cryptobiosis. And it refers to life on the outside edge of livable conditions. And some of the outer space scientists that looking for life on other planets are interested in, well, how extreme can living things survive? Well, we can see here on the planet Earth that there are some organisms that have been designed to live without water. This is called anhydrobiosis, and the water bear being an example. We'll talk about him a little more in just a moment. Then there's anoxobiosis, which is living in a condition where there's virtually no oxygen. So life has been designed by God to actually exist without oxygen, or at least with such a small amount of oxygen that it's almost unheard of. Then there's cryobiosis, which is living in frozen conditions. The wood frog, right now, well, probably not this year because of all the warm weather we've been having, but these frogs are capable of freezing solid, literally being frozen to the point where they can be broke into like a popsicle. And yet, when spring comes back, their body warms back up. They have zero life signs. There is no breathing, no heart rate, no nothing, no cellular activity, and yet those frogs are capable of returning back to life. And there are actually ice worms. One of the members from Belington, we have actually 4 of the members from Belington here today. They were really suckers for punishment, drive all the way over here this morning to hear the presentation, but I appreciate it. But one of the members from Belington asked me to write an article about the worms that live in glaciers. And I said, Clarence, and he's passed away on to his reward now, but I said, Clarence, you're crazy. There's no such thing. He said, you look into it. I did. There is. All right. There are worms that live in glaciers, solid block of ice. And that's how they keep from freezing and how they find the food that they need. It's really an amazing story, and actually that's one of the articles. I wrote him an article. He said, you need to write an article for the West Virginia Christian about that, and I did, and it's on the website now. So chemobiosis, the chemical, living things that are capable of living off of chemicals rather than food. Things like the methane ice worm. And there are some really strange forms of life. Here's the methane ice worm. That's what he looks like if you do a scanning electron microscope of him. He's a real pretty fella. That's one of those faces only a mother could love. But boy, they're not very large, but they live in areas where there is virtually no forms of energy other than methane, other than the gas methane, and they're capable. They have been designed to feed off of that particular type. And then, of course, there's also osmobiosis, which is living in areas where extreme amounts of water are present. Well, we mentioned the water bear, the tardigrades, and most of you have never seen a water bear. I've never seen one. I tried for 20 plus years to find one because virtually every day you go walk out through the yard out here, you've stepped on them. They're present virtually everywhere, and yet they're very, very hard to find. But one of these days, I may yet run across one. If I do, I'll be really, really excited. But this has got to be probably the toughest animal on the entire earth because it's capable of surviving conditions that just are the extreme to the extreme. Normally, they live in water. Normally, they are totally aquatic. So they call them the bear of the moss because they do live on moss. And, of course, moss always grows where it's rather damp and moist. And so the water bears do live where there's lots of water. So they can do the wet thing real well. They can endure temperatures well over boiling, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. They can be froze down to negative 273. They can survive in elevations, the highest of elevations, and they can survive in places where there is literally nothing. Not too many, it's been about probably 12, 13 months ago, the International Space Station, while they were on the outside of the International Space Station, they were taking some samples. They wanted to see what kind of micrometeorites and other issues that they may have on the outside of the International Space Station. When they got those samples back to Earth and started examining them, what they found was water bears living on the outside of the International Space Station in total vacuum. They're surviving there somehow. They still haven't answered how that's even possible. But an amazing design of God. When it becomes dry, when they decide that there's not enough water for them to carry on their normal life processes, they literally turn themselves into a grain of sand. That's all that's left of the water bear until water comes back, and then it's just like, poof, there he is. We have instant coffee. Well, we have instant water bear. You put a little bit of water, and back he comes into his perfectly normal condition. It's an amazing ability that certainly God has created with this animal. Well, then there's the giant tube worms of the volcanic rifts in the ocean. And this is one of those things that for a biologist, we didn't know these existed until the late 70s whenever we first got vehicles, deep submersibles into the ocean around these volcanic vents. And instead of being areas where it was just totally devoid of life other than just an occasional fish or deep sea shark that would swim by, they found a huge oasis around these volcanic vents where superheated water came up out of the mantle of the earth. Well, these worms are among those organisms that are found down there. The ability, the way they work is just incredible. I had the chance to visit the Smithsonian, had some friends that had the keys. You know, if you ever go to the Smithsonian in Washington, you know that they have a pretty good, nice display, but behind the scenes is where it really is happening. Only about 10% of the collection is actually out front where people can see, unless you know someone with the keys. Well, I knew someone with the keys, and we got to go back, and we went into the area where the worm division is. That's, you know, a building almost, a floor almost as big as this school, nothing but worms in it. And but they had the curator of worms happened to be there, and they had just received some specimens of these tube worms from the volcanic vents off the coast of Puerto Rico. And he pulled it out and actually started discussing the biology with us. And there's not much that brings me to tears. I'm not generally too, but that almost did. Whenever he started discussing the fact that this worm doesn't have a digestive system, it doesn't eat, doesn't have a mouth. I mean, if you look at it, you know, it's just a tube, and you know that is non-living. It secretes the tube, but the worm itself, of course, survives by pulling back down in the tube. It has this blood red top on it, which is actually part of the method by which it absorbs the oxygen that it needs. But it feeds by housing, by being a symbiote to bacteria. Sulfur-eating bacteria that is very abundant in this volcanic superheated water. The bacteria that live inside of these cells, there are the bacteria there, that live inside the cells, eat the sulfur, and then the worm eats the waste products from the sulfur. Just incredibly well designed for a very unique environment. And of course, the evolutionists jumped all over this and said, well, right here is where life began. This is where life started, right here. Now, the only problem with that is every one of the organisms that they found, and they found hundreds of totally new species, they have no evidence for an ancestor, a predecessor. They just were there. And of course, that's the way when we look at fossils. When fossils are collected, you find the living thing. It may not be in rock layers below. It may not be in rock layers above. But when it's there, it's an adult form. It's never part this, part that, or anything else. So the giant tube worm, another piece of evidence that God has shown us. And the more we study biology, the more we study science, the more we reveal the things of God's creation that should make everyone say, yeah, there must be a designer. If there's a design, got news for you folks, there's a designer. All right? Impossible to have a beautifully designed car or watch or airplane or computer if there wasn't a designer. You can't say, well, a tornado ripped through a junkyard and there sits a nice new Mercedes-Benz with GPS built in and the touchscreen little stuff, and I have no idea what all those things do nowadays. Got a car that has, and I'm still confused. I have no idea what it does. It gets me down the road. That's all I'm worried about. Well, we can look at the geothermal worms now at the same location, those same vents, and at the bottom of gold mines. They have found these geothermal worms. And this is a scanning electron microscope of, again, that's another one of those faces that only a mother's going to take a shine to. But they're nematodes. A nematode is a small worm, and they're in the ground by the millions, or probably by the trillions, not millions. But they live in deep oceans. They live in the rock layers down deep in the earth where it's very, very hot. They're 1/200th of an inch. And they eat something called biofilm. Biofilm is basically slime. It's a slime of organic material of unsure origin right now, but at the bottom of these gold mines, one of the problems that the miners who go down there and work have is everything gets slippery. The walls get slippery over time because as oxygen comes down with the miners, of course, they have to breathe oxygen. So as they go down, they pump oxygen down. This causes the proliferation of these biofilms, which are bacterial layers. They're layers of bacteria. And this geothermal worm can eat up to 10,000 bacteria a day. And of course, just newly discovered in the last 3 or 4 years. And of course, not a whole lot known other than this is what he's feeding on. And so an amazing creature, and again, showing the design creativity that God had when he created each one of these things in the beginning. Well, then we can look around here. This critter, some of you may never have seen them, but they live in live in Virginia. They live in West Virginia. I took this photograph just over the hill from my house of this acorn weevil. And an acorn weevil is really nasty if if you've got white-tailed deer that like to eat acorns, because the acorn weevil actually bores a hole into the, well, let's see, we've got a couple more pictures here. You can see that the acorn weevil, look at his head. If we go back one, you can see he's looking straight forward here now, okay? So there's his head, but this little section right out here basically is on a turnstile. It's on a rocker mechanism. And when he finds an acorn that he wants to eat, which is virtually every acorn they find, they bore a hole, and you can see in the diagram, they twist their head back and forth like a drill bit. And they drill down into that acorn, and then, of course, this is the female because she's going to lay an egg. She'll lay an egg in that hole, and then, of course, the egg will hatch, the larva will come out, and the acorn will be digested, eaten from the inside. And, of course, if the deer are trying to find an acorn to eat, and you can pick up an acorn, and if it has a little hole in it, bingo, the acorn weevil got to it first. And there are many years when virtually every acorn you get will have the weevils in them. If you want to catch one, I can tell you, take an acorn, it's got a hole in it, put it in a bag or something, and just let it lay there. 2 or 3 days, the weevil will, the larva will eat everything out, and he'll come out. And he'll come out looking for another meal or looking to pupate and become an adult. And so you can, and actually we used to catch those to feed them to fish. Fish loved them. The acorn, the maggots of the acorn weevil. But certainly the design features that the lifestyle, and of course that they become an adult moth. This is what the moths look like, the male and the female. And of course there's what they look like when they're in the acorn. And again, they destroy the acorn so that there are no nutritional value to the deer and the turkey and the bear and the other animals that eat them. So the acorn weevil and the design of the head, okay, to basically form a drill bit with the end of the head structure. That area right there is a phenomenal. No other beetle, no other insect has any structure anywhere near this type, okay? There are a few other weevils, okay, and they have some similar features, but not like the acorn weevil with the drill bit head, not just the snout, but the entire head itself. Well, then we can look at things like the giraffe. Of course, all of us have stood at the zoo and just fascinated at something that's 20 plus feet tall, 23, 24 feet tall, and how they can survive, with, you think, okay, if they have, their necks are huge, 8, 9 feet long, but do you realize that we have cervical vertebrae, the vertebrae in our neck, as do dogs, cats, and all other animals that have a skeleton. We have 9 vertebrae in our neck. Guess how many vertebrae are in the neck of a giraffe that's 8 feet long? 9, that's all. There are only 9 vertebrae in the giraffe's neck. They just happen to be big. They're anywhere from 10 to 12 inches in length. And in order to hold the neck up, they have to be designed, and there's a huge muscle and ligament system that comes all the way back down along the backbone to allow the giraffe to be able to hold the head up there. And in actuality, the physics of the muscle system, which wasn't what I was planning to talk about, but in some of my research in the last few weeks, the muscle system and the counterbalance of that system in the hind quarters of the muscles that come all the way down, it basically makes the giraffe's head so that it stays up on its own. It's a counterbalanced weighted system. And it's an amazingly designed situation. But what specifically I'm interested in talking about is what happens when the giraffe puts his head down. Now remember, the giraffe has a heart. Well, he's a mammal. So he's got a heart and he's got to pump blood from here all the way up to his brain. Of course, we know what happens if our brains don't get oxygen for a few seconds. We pass out, okay? Well, the giraffe will do the same thing. And so God had to design in the giraffe a mechanism by which, when it is standing upright, there's an adequate amount of blood pressure to keep blood flowing to the brain so that it doesn't pass out. But when it kneels down, or when it bends down, doesn't kneel down, but when it bends down to eat or to drink, which it has to do, of course in the zoo they'll sometimes put their feeding troughs up high, but in the wild they may be eating out of trees, but the water is always down on the ground. And in order to get down like this, for the giraffe to be able to go, its blood pressure system, to be able to go from the pressure necessary to pump oxygen up to its brain to stopping doing that and to reduce the blood pressure to the point where it's virtually running in reverse. Basically what happens is when the giraffe puts its head down, there are muscles in the arteries of the neck that squeeze and push the blood flow backwards, pushing it back towards the body, because if it had all that blood rushing down to its head, get his head down there, he would just keel over and pass out. Too much, the blood pressure would be too high for it to be able to maintain consciousness. And so God has designed and there's about 10 different mechanisms that operate. The tiny muscles along the arteries, the backflow valves, which can be controlled independently in the arteries of the blood system carrying to the brain of the giraffe. It's an incredible system, and these adjustments are made millions of times a second when the giraffe goes down, gets a drink, and comes back up. He's got to make these, and of course he's not thinking about it, just like us. How many of you would think about anything if you had to run every cell of your body? Every one of the millions of muscles. Remember, every hair on your body has its own muscle. Can you imagine trying to control every muscle of your body? Well, I mean, our brains are pretty good, but we can't think of that many things at a time, let alone all the functions of the cell and so on and so on. We would simply overload our brains, smoke would come out our ears, and we just, whoosh, that'd be it. We'd be gone. I don't know, maybe you guys could handle it. I don't know, okay? I know I would be a total basket case if I tried to control. And so would the giraffe. It would be in the same situation if it had to be able to control all of that blood pressure mechanism, that hydraulic mechanism necessary to allow it to just bend its head down and get a drink of water, of course, which it has to do. And here is the diagrams you can see. I think we've covered all of them, but you can see all of the different parts that are necessary to go into making that possible. Well, as we move on to the field of genetics, and we're almost out of time, aren't we? The field of genetics is amazing because God created in the beginning and commanded every living thing to reproduce after its kind. When we look at genetics with the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, which those of you that have seen me, if someone said, "Hey, I like your tie," well, that's DNA, folks. That's deoxyribonucleic acid. And folks, without this, life doesn't exist. DNA is so critical. The structure of it, how it can. If we take the DNA out of each one of our cells of our body, lay it down end to end, 23 chromosomes, it will stretch about 3 feet. That's nice. You take 100 trillion cells, which our bodies are made up of, and you take all the DNA out, unwind them, lay them down end to end, it'll stretch from here to the sun, 93 million miles, and back 24 times. Okay? That's how much DNA we carry in our cells. That's how much DNA we carry in our body. The amount of information carried in the DNA is staggering. If we were to start typing it out, a set of encyclopedias, 1,000 volumes long with 500 pages in each volume. That's the size of the information it would take to carry, how many books it would take to carry the information carried in the nucleus of each of our cells, in that microscopic DNA inside the nucleus, and of course it's just mind-boggling. And every, of course, living thing has its own unique combination of DNA. Well, then, of course, it's to this DNA that mutations have to occur, and mutations are absolutely essential if you're an evolutionist, because mutations are the fuel. You have to get something that isn't reproducing properly in order for something new to come about. That's the fuel for evolution. That's what drives natural selection, whether it's Charles Darwin's explanation or Richard Hawkins or whoever. That's the basic idea. They've got to have mutations. The only problem is 99% of all mutations are harmful, okay? And the number of times they occur is just crazily small. Matter of fact, you may have heard of something called mitochondrial DNA, which a few years ago they started tracing mitochondrial DNA back, and they came to the discovery that there were 3 females, because mitochondrial DNA is only carried by the female and passed on to the offspring by the female. There are 3 females, 3 female lines that all human beings on the planet Earth, all 7.whatever billion people, go back to 3 original women. Imagine that. Ham, Shem, and Japheth's wives. Go figure. But I didn't say that. No. All right. But the problem is that when they started looking at the mutation rate of mitochondrial DNA, it doesn't mutate fast enough for them to have the billions of years or millions of years, certainly, that humans would have taken to evolve. They have actually now changed the dating on the mitochondrial DNA back to the point where they say all humans arose, the mitochondrial DNA for all humans arose 6,000 years ago. 6,000, now think about that. That's about the same time as, what even happened about 6,000 years ago? Well, it's creation of the world, number one, but that would have been just about 1,000 years after Ham, Shem, and Japheth's wives started repopulating the earth. And so, amazingly enough, this mutation rate has actually become a very great tool for creationists because of the change in what they thought they knew about the mutation of the mitochondrial DNA. Then there's something called law of revision to the averages, which means we can make things hybridized, we can change them, we can shoot them with X-rays, with gamma radiation, with chemicals. We can make them change, folks. We can make them become something, well, not something else. If you take a fruit fly, a Drosophila melanogaster, which is what this little critter up here is, that's a Drosophila melanogaster. It's one of the most studied animals in the world. Has a new population every 11 days. Well, you can make it have, well, normally it has 36 bristles. You can make it have 9 bristles. You can make it have 12 bristles. You can get rid of its wings. You can even get rid of its eyes. You can actually take the eyes out of a fruit fly so that it has no eyes, it has no optic nerve, and yet, when, oh, don't do that. And when, the only problem is if you stop messing with it, leave it alone. Let the male and the female reproduce. Within 6 generations, guess what reappears in the babies? Eyes come back. Functional eyes come back. And we did everything we could to get rid of them. The law of revision to the average says we may mutate, we may hybridize, we may change, but if we leave it alone, let it do its thing the way God commanded it to, it comes back to what God created. Now, oh sure, we can have different hybrids of corn. You know, we can get watermelons that are 4 feet long and watermelons that are 6 inches long. We can get poodles, we can get Great Danes, we can get all these different things by genetic controlling breeding, hybridization. But when we stop doing it, when we stop messing with them, if we took all of our purebred dogs today and just turned them loose and let them run, let them breed with whoever they want to do, what would we come back with? God's original kind, Heinz 57, they'd be mutts. Because the genetic information would all be recombined like God had created it in the original kind. And of course, that certainly in Genesis 1 is exactly what the law of genetics proves. Geneticists have never been able to show anything other than exactly what God said living things were to do. Hasn't happened. I'm convinced it's never going to happen, no matter how much we try. Well, this is the rate of mitochondrial DNA. We're skipping that. The DNA, it's crazy what it does. It copies itself. Can you imagine a set of encyclopedias making a copy of itself? Well, that's what DNA does. Not only does it copy itself, it also has a spell checker built in. It checks itself as it copies itself to make sure it doesn't make a mistake. Of course, it sometimes still makes a mistake, and if it does, that causes problems. That causes a mutation. And normally, there is a mechanism by which we can detect that. If you've ever had the chance, or if you ever had the chance, go to YouTube and type in mitosis, and you can see some actual video of the reproduction, the mitosis of cells. It's called the dance of life. These are the chromosomes that are here, of course, is the nucleus, and my pointer's not one to work very well. Here's the nucleus inside of the chromosomes. That's what you see here. They are undergoing the 5 steps, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase currently, but you can actually watch these things in real time, and they move, they dance around inside the cells as these chromosomes line up on each side of the metaphasic plate, which is basically just each side of the cell. When half of them go over here, half of them go over here, and then the cell divides, and we come up with these 2 daughter cells, okay? And that happens trillions of times every second in our body. Now again, everyone's controlling each one of those, right? You're making this group of chromosomes grow over here, and you're causing the all of these things. You're in control of each one of those millions of cells. I don't think so. Somebody is, something is, and of course, when mitosis goes wrong, when it doesn't work the way God designed it, does it cause a problem? Absolutely. We call cancer, and cancer is the incorrect cell division that occurs, and we've all had cancer. Everyone in this room has had cancer. And I'm not talking about going to the hospital and being treated and et cetera, and going into remission. Our cells, because of the number of times we replicate cells, we have had situations where they haven't copied properly, but they have been detected and they have been eliminated. Those cells that were incorrectly copied were removed and restored. Well, we got to quit. We're out of time already. All right, well, you can take DNA and imagine the numbers, the length, again, reaching clear to the sun, and you can see how it is literally packed inside of the nucleus of the cell. There are special proteins, look like little golf balls. They're called histones, the H1 histone. And their only function in life is to be something for the DNA to wrap itself around so that it doesn't get tangled up. I know all of you young folks have no idea what I'm going to say next. But us older folks know what it's like to have a telephone that had a long spirally cord on it. And what did that long, and sometimes you could get long ones. My mom had one. So she could go clear across the kitchen and talk to somebody, Well, when she came back, what happened to that long cord? What did it do? Doing. It got all messed up, didn't it? And then she'd have to sit there one day, unwind it all, and get it all straight. Okay? Well, you can't do that with the DNA because it is simply so small, and so it has to have its own mechanism so that it doesn't get all messed up inside of the cell, and that's what DNA packing is all about. Well, I didn't say earlier, and I was supposed to. Warren's probably back there. You forgot to mention he'd take questions. Yellow came back there, shaking them down. But I do want to take some questions. We don't have as much time as what we probably would have planned on, but so I will take some questions, whether it's about some of this. Of course, remember that we will in the next session. We're going to take a break and then start again at whatever time we start back. I don't know. My job is just to talk, not to worry about the timekeeper. But we'll talk about the age of the earth, and then we will, this afternoon, talk about the dinosaurs and the Genesis flood. Now, are there any, Warren says, stop. Okay, I'll get a drink. Oh, I can. Oh, that's nice of you. Giving my microphone away. Oh, you're here. Questions? You can ask, even if we can't. I'll try to repeat the question in case you have one. See, I do such a good job explaining. There's no questions. No, we got one over there. It's on, yeah. Well, let me say this, and I'll actually present this in the beginning of the next session, just a little more detail. But science is used to support. Science is neutral. Observations are neutral. They don't, we can go out and look at God in nature and say like the American, well, there's got to be something more powerful than us. We can make that, but we don't know anything about God from that. We just know that there must be something. All right? Well, the problem is that if there's something, then we have to answer to something. It's more powerful than we are. And the evidence can either support a situation where God does not exist. Natural events could could bring it about. Science can be used to help either worldview. Now, worldview is simply the idea that why are we here? Why is life here? Either we're just inanimate matter. We're just like Rover. When we die, we're dead all over, and that's it. Or we're here for a purpose. We were designed for a reason. We're created in the image of God. If we accept that worldview, then the same scientific information can be interpreted and used to support either of the worldviews. Those are the two predominant ones. There are others, pantheism and and, and there's several others, but there are about 5 total worldviews. But generally, it's theism and naturalism. And the same piece of evidence can be interpreted to go both ways. And I believe God did that for a purpose, because if he had created us with only one possible answer, then there wouldn't have been the choice. And God loves us enough to give us a choice. Okay? Give us a choice. And in order to have a choice, there has to be 2 possible options. And so the same evidence can be used, whether it's fossils, whether it's biology, whether it's whatever. Can be used to support either worldview that humans accept. Other questions? Well, we're about out of time then, aren't we, Warren? We have a 15-minute break now, right? Oh, Travis says 3 minutes. Woo. Any other questions? Oh, it's just Stanley. Hi, Stanley. I give Stanley all kinds of grief at church all the time.
The only thing I was going to ask, like the beginning there, was talking about the water thing. And there was seeing one, I was wondering, how big are they?
You could line up about a dozen, and it would, you're a carpenter, the smallest mark on your carpenter's tape, they could, a dozen of them would fit in between the smallest marks, about 32nd of an inch. About a dozen of them would fit inside that space, lined up head to tail. They're small, very small. Other questions? What do they actually eat? Well, they eat organic material, living in, there's dead material in the moss, and so they actually consume organic material that, like I said, they live in streams, they live in water, live in the moss and the wet grass. And so just organic material, it's all dead. They're not predators on anything, so they're just eating, small bits of organic material. So they graze like cows. Okay. Other questions? Oh, Warren's got one finger. Yeah, it's a nice finger, Warren. I got 1 minute. Yeah, Warren's got a question. He's got his hand up back there. Well, we do want to take a break, and let me say one thing. And I got here fairly early, and Warren was talking to the custodian of the building, but he had to leave. And after he left, I came in here and was working, setting things up, and Warren came in and I said, Warren, did you ask the custodian about getting the thermostat in the building off of the unoccupied setting? Now, being a school board member, one of the things we're very concerned about is wasteful energy. It costs us thousands and thousands of dollars every year. And I'm sure the same thing is true here in this county. But I'm sure the temperature, so I see Kathy back there huddled up. So you may have to move in closer to each other for body warmth in this next session. But I don't think we have the thermostat set on an occupied setting. I'm sure it's a computer-controlled setting and it has to be overridden. And Warren and I both, Warren didn't think of it, and the custodian got out of here before he mentioned it. So we do apologize if it's a little cold, so you can go run up and down the halls and warm up. All right, so what, 10 minutes? Warren, you just don't kind of got to break it all, do you? I'm just giving you a hard time, Warren.